Hello everybody and welcome to another fun and funky detailed diatribe. I hesitate to call this one very special because this is at this point something like my fourth detailed diatribe about superheroes.
This one's different.
This one's different. I'm complaining.
It's about several of them.
Yeah, this one's different because it's not just about Superman, even though the subtitle of this is directly from Superman. I promise I like other superheroes, and I think about things that aren't superheroes sometimes too. I contain multitudes, but a lot of them are superhero comics. This particular detailed diatribe and corresponding slideshow are the result of me kind of finally figuring out something that's been bothering me about superhero movie adaptation specifically, and shows to a lesser extent, for years and years. This problem has been kind of silently growing, invisible under the surface, infiltrating.
A secret invasion of this problem in your mind.
Damn it! Yeah, but yes, that is exactly what it is. I have actually complained about this problem before, but I haven't been able, to verbalize what exactly was bothering me about it, so this is kind of my thesis on, oh, that's why I didn't like these movies specifically, but did really like these movies, or why this one didn't work for me, or why this specific plot point rubbed me the wrong way. It's all been leading back to this. So, let's talk about why do all these superhero universes feel so empty and they don't really need superheroes at all to
Toys. Toys. They gotta sell toys.
They gotta sell toys. We gotta get them Funko Pops. But let's pretend for a minute that we live in a world that is not dictated entirely by the whims of capitalism. Let's pretend that artistic vision is truly what matters in these stories. In that case, why do all these superhero universes feel so empty and weird? So, to start off, we should go back to the very beginning. Why we have superheroes at all. The very first superhero as we currently categorize them was the Phantom, the ghost who walks. He was written starting in 1936. His gist was that he was the latest holder of the title Phantom, carried on a family oath to destroy all forms of piracy, greed, and cruelty. He was quickly overshadowed by Superman and Batman and all the other cool big names from back in the day.
Destroy all forms of piracy? I didn't realize the Phantom was a fucking narc.
Hey, it was 1600s piracy, alright? He didn't know yet.
Yeah, sure.
The Phantom just crouched over, reporting email addresses he finds on the Pirate Bay. Okay. But there were a lot of other characters that were sort of cast from the same mold that contributed to the current concept of superheroes. A lot of them had secret identities. Obviously, you got Zorro in there, the explicit in-universe inspiration for Batman, which is kind of cute. He had a secret identity, with his civilian identity being a rich, ditzy playboy, and his secret, vigilante identity, wearing all black with a cool cape. It's pretty obvious, but, so you got that, you got, Robin Hood folklore, a noble outlaw undercutting tyranny, helping the poor. Scarlet Pimpernel is a kind of classic referenced prototype superhero. He was a wealthy Englishman with a secret identity as a rich idiot playboy, and he, saved aristocrats from the French Revolution. So...
This is fascinating. I'm gonna read this one after we're done today.
Hell yeah. And it was, written by this baroness, so, yeah, that's pretty cool. That one I think has aged weirdly because, people have sort of come around on elements of the French Revolution, but, the Scarlet...
Yeah, I'm very curious to see how they handle it, because, he helps the aristocrats get out of the guillotine. It's okay.
Yeah, well that was
I'm gonna need you to contextualize this so I can see what angle you're taking here.
I think she was writing from the perspective of an aristocrat who was kind of watching this happen from a distance and was like, man, someone should do something about that. I'll make up a guy who could do something about that. You also got the Shadow. He originated in radio plays, which was kind of interesting because that meant his power set was it had to kind of make sense in an audio-only format, and then when he was adapted into visual media later, they were like, the Shadow can be invisible. Maybe. Or maybe it's hypnosis. You know what? It's fine. But his gist was, who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The Shadow knows. And then he turned up in a trench coat and cape and big gun and stopped bad people from doing bad things. And you also got some space age superhero types. You got Buck Rogers, and shortly thereafter Flash Gordon, legally distinct from Buck Rogers. And they kind of just went on wacky adventures and stopped bad guys. And you can kind of see how the ingredients of modern superheroes were all sort of filtering out of this corpus of literature. You had the secret identity thing. You had, what if they had a fun rogues gallery of recurring villains for them to deal with? You had, why are they doing this? They're doing it because something bad is happening and they can stop that. And yeah, so as superheroes kind of developed, things got a little bit separated from that original in-universe reason for the heroes to exist. The broad development timeline for this sort of story is laid out on this slide with the example of Sherlock Holmes, who is not a superhero, but he is a hero, and he fits the shape that we've discussed pretty clearly. He exists because there is a problem that he is uniquely qualified to try and help people with. So the development timeline in this sort of thing is that you have real-world crimes, problems, you know, scary things happen, and the writer is like, oh man, that's scary. What if there was a person who could deal with that? Let me make up a guy, and then get really into that guy. So for instance, you know, Sherlock Holmes, fictional detective, he solves various crimes, he helps victims that, like, the police won't listen to, or perhaps can't go to the police, you know, people who otherwise have nobody to help them. Sherlock Holmes helps them. As time goes on, this fictional hero will take on a life of their own. As they get more popular, stories get more complicated, the writer contrives more problems and dangers for this hero to deal with. This can lead to the antagonists becoming more threatening and maybe escalating into full-on nemesis territory. Instead of it being kind of a problem of the week setup, you might get recurring threats, kind of a rogues gallery, as you were. So that's when you start getting Sherlock Holmes dealing with Professor Moriarty, who is only in 2 stories in the original run. That is, you know, 1 more story than most people he typically deals with.
Wasn't Irene Adler only in a story?
She's only in 1 story, yes.
Yep,
she's a problem of the week. What happens then is that later adaptations of this hero will fixate on those standout characters, frequently the villains, which can lead to them sort of disregarding the underlying substrate of, you know, the everyday problems that this hero exists to solve and was inspired by and probably spends most of their time dealing with, rather than just the few bright flashes of fun, scary nemesis, or nemesis that you're maybe a little bit gay with, that kind of thing. So in these adaptations that focus entirely on the character facing off against their greatest foe, rather than all of the other little foes that kind of define who they are, the hero can sort of be separated from their reason to exist. And this is a problem that mostly arises in adaptations that are separated from those original formative conditions that led to this character arising in story.
Yeah, this is where we essentially see the friendly neighborhood to Avengers level threat pipeline, where you start, first bullet point, just doing stuff in a place, helping people out. And then by the end, with enough time, I mean, granted, the original Sherlock Holmes ran for many, many, many short stories. There's a lot of OG Holmes. But even then, when you add, you know, a century and a half to the mix, you have a lot of time for people to stew on this and fixate on what they deem to be the most important aspect of his character, which is gay best frenemy Moriarty. And then you get, you know, once you're at BBC Sherlock, you have literally every threat that he has faced not only pales in comparison to Moriarty, but every other threat was orchestrated by Moriarty the whole time. Which is, we're getting into Sherlock is garbage and here's why territory, but I shall not step on the toes of H. Bomberman.
Of course.
H. Bomber guy.
It's close enough.
And this is a really good example of how, with time, that pipeline can naturally run its course over a century and a half, but I'm sure we're going to see how that can also happen way the hell faster.
Yeah. Well, we start running into this specific kind of problem. I chose this example because it kind of shows this process in the cleanest, quickest form I could find, even though it did take like a century and a half, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Because in a universe where Sherlock Holmes is entirely defined by his mind battle with Moriarty, who is both the greatest and the only threat he ever deals with, why does Sherlock Holmes exist? Like, why does he, what? Because he's already doing his thing before Moriarty shows up, because he doesn't arise in response to Moriarty. The implication is that Moriarty arises in response to him. You know, even in Sherlock, that's like, oh, you've got yourself a fan. It's like, he does, but what does he even do? There's this implied background of normal crimes happening, normal bad things that these heroes are dealing with. But we rarely see them, and it's kind of an out of sight, out of mind thing. The less we see them, the less we recognize that they're happening. The less we think about them, the less the writers think about them, and you end up getting this character who's sort of completely cut off from why they exist. But we are getting ahead of ourselves a little. Let's start with, again, superheroes. Why does a superhero...
Firefighter Superman.
Firefighter Superman. Why does a superhero do what they do? 2 simple reasons. Because it needs to be done, and because they can do it. Because of who they are as a person, they will always feel the need to do this thing that needs to be done, opposing this danger, this injustice, avenging a tragedy. There's something at work in the world that's doing harm, and it needs to be stopped. Factor number 2, this character has some skill, skill or ability or power that means they can do something about it. And because of that, and because of who they are as a person, they are going to use their power to do the thing that needs to be done. That's it. It's very simple, it's a 1-2 punch. So basically what we have is that superheroes arise in response to pervasive evil and injustice and problems that they want to solve, and they exist and continue to exist to oppose that ongoing issue. The thing is, basically the thesis of this dubiously titled presentation is that a perfect Earth doesn't need a Superman. This is taken from, I think this is like Crisis 2 Electric Boogaloo. The gist is that this Superman has been trying to mess things up in a crusade that he thinks is for a good reason. He wants to bring back his perfect Earth. Our Superman points out that if it needed a Superman, it wasn't a perfect Earth. And that's the simple fact of it. That, like, just that is enough to make this Superman realize, like, oh, whoops, I completely lost the plot on this.
We're the baddies.
Yeah, basically. And that's the thing. Like, if the world is perfect, it doesn't need a Superman. Clark Kent could just do his own thing, but the world isn't perfect, so the hero has something to do. Again, it's an order of operations that becomes easy to reverse if you lose track of things. Even in the grim Dark Age, superheroes existed for a reason. Even when they were being all horrible and depressing, and it was all meditations on humanity and cruelty, the superheroes were still very much necessary.
I really like this interpretation of Venom.
I like it too.
And it's completely in character as well. He's just a little goofball sometimes.
I think this is from the beginning of Lethal Protector.
Oh,
which,
yeah. No, that tracks. That tracks.
I'm a fan of Venom as kind of just normal, cartoonishly evil Black Suit Spider-Man arc, but I will admit, I really like it when he's just a goofy goober.
We'll have more to talk about on that in an upcoming detailed diatribe.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh,
stay
boy,
tuned.
planting payoff. Let's go.
So the thing is, when we've had superheroes for nearly a century, they become the status quo. We stop thinking to question why they exist. We stop recognizing that they exist in direct opposition to a constant ongoing problem. This is a panel from a thing we'll get into in a few slides, but the gist is that you start getting these superhero stories where the superheroes don't exist because there's a problem to solve. They exist because they want fame or money, and they're going out and like picking fights and looking for trouble, and there isn't any trouble for them to find. Which is a baffling direction to take a superhero universe in, because...
Yeah, that's... Yeah.
Yeah, you start with the premise that this is a world that needs heroes, and then you're like, but what problems? I don't see any. You're just picking fights with homeless people. What are you doing, man? And it's like, wait, hold on, this whole operation was your idea.
I'll see if I can find this, but there's a little webcomic where someone says, help, that person stole a loaf of bread from my bakery, and this superhero, I think it's like a cat, is like, don't worry, I'll deal with this, and they go to the mayor's office, and it's like, how come people in your town can't afford food? So it's like, you don't need to go beat up the poor. You can actually just solve problems instead. It is truly baffling that an interpretation of a superhero story can somehow get to the point of like, well, we need to find something to do. Like, there's always something to do. Oh man, that is throwing me. I'm sorry.
That's the thing. That's what's been driving me nuts for years and years. You get these superhero stories that put the superheroes in this world and then don't give them anything to do, and then make the superhero feel all like, oh, I just don't know, there's nothing for me to do, and then they throw one problem at them per movie, and then they usually kill the problem, and then they go back to being like, oh, the world doesn't need me, and it's like, then why am I watching this movie? Why did you make it?
10 slides till Man of Steel, I'm calling it.
I'm trying to make it a rule to not talk movies I haven't seen, and I desperately don't want to watch Man of Steel.
I watched Man of Steel.
Oh, good.
That is a very thorough and solid description of the back half of Man of Steel, because once Clark is established as Superman, he speed runs into, wait, but what am I here for? And like, we talked about this in the last Superman one, like, early Clark in Man of Steel wants to help people.
Yeah.
He does so many things to help people. The oil rig, the kids on the bus, there's so much stuff where he's actually being a good Superman. And then once he gets the suit, it's like, okay, well now you need to brood about it.
Now there's nothing
And then
for
it just
you to do.
completely inverts the whole point of his character. So you haven't seen Man of Steel. I have, and I think that's accurate to the second half.
Awesome, great. I did notice that from what I've seen of the DCEU, it started with this problem really bad, and then it sort of ratcheted it back over time. It sort of tried to course correct, because by the time we got to Justice League, or at least the Snyder Cut, it was kind of working for me, a little bit. You know, Wonder Woman, I thought pulled it off really well. Aquaman actually did a very good job making the world seem like it had a lot going on, and it was believable that, like, hey, this hero can't come to the phone right now because he's busy dealing with some fucking crazy shit in the ocean you don't want to know about, man. Like, that's a thing that most of these superhero settings can't pull off, because it's like one thing per movie, and they never really hang out with each other. So, and I did notice in Batman v Superman, there's like a little montage of Clark doing superhero, like Superman stuff to kind of drive home, like, he's doing this, like, this is the thing that he's doing. And when he's dead at the beginning, everyone's like, oh, we miss Superman, everything's gone to shit without him. And it's like, all right, you're tell-don't showing it, but I respect that you're at least telling me that things went wrong without Superman. Like, that's better than we were at for the last couple movies. Anyway.
It does kind of show Batman being a little bit on the back foot, trying to pick up some of the pieces and do two superheroes' jobs at once, but it's implied. It's really implied. Not shown or conveyed very strongly.
Yeah, but it does feel like they sort of recognize, like, Man of Steel had a problem because we did not convince the world that Superman was anything but a giant liability, because, like, oh, he shows up and immediately New York City gets pounded into the ground by a gravity machine. Oopsies! Like, we don't get to see him fixing things.
Practically what we see at the beginning of Justice League is the world is sad because Superman's gone. It's not the world is now hopelessly incompetent against the massive amount of problems that it is facing because Superman is God.
Yeah.
Because Superman is gone, I should say.
Yeah, whoopsies, accidentally said the quiet part out loud.
No, I just, I glottal stopped, I swallowed the syllable on that one.
So
is it a Freudian slip if you just mispronounce the word?
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, a little bit. Okay, so in adaptations, you run into this problem a lot. It's easy to focus on the second factor of why we have superheroes. Because they can do this cool thing that nobody else can do, that's why they're a hero. Great. But if we neglect reason one, there's a thing that has to be done, we end up with these sort of disconnected, directionless heroes that exist because they have to exist. Their face is on the poster. But, like, there's not really anything in universe that's, like, motivating them. They might have a single inciting incident. You know, Batman cannot get through a movie without his parents getting iced. But, like, after that part, the writer needs to remember that they have a continuing motivation. They can't just drop the cowl and retire whenever they want, which is something that a lot of superhero movies have completely forgotten about, because so many hero movies nowadays end with the hero just retiring and nobody notices. And this has been driving me nuts since the Nolan Batman movies.
Yeah, an important distinction is that, like what you said, a inciting incident is not a motivating force.
Mm-hmm. It smacks them on the bum and gets them moving, but it doesn't keep them going after the beginning.
Yeah, like, that'll get you to the end of Act 2, but really...
Yeah.
That's about it.
Right. Now, I did want to talk about what I think is not the reason this problem exists, but has definitely led to some difficulties in adaptations of especially Marvel properties, and that is the Civil War run from 2006 to 7, a little 7-issue massive crossover event. And I initially started making this because I was like, you know, I really feel like the MCU Civil War movie is where it really started to feel like they kind of lost the plot on why superheroes exist, because that's a movie where literally the only problem in that movie is caused by superheroes. Like, there is no outside threat. Even Zemo is just turning them against each other. And I was like, oh, that's so annoying. I really feel like that's the problem. Let me go looking for the comic. I'm sure they pulled this off much better. I was wrong about that. But it was a learning experience because, of course, the MCU Civil War was loosely an adaptation of this big crossover event. And a few people who talked about the movie were like, look, you gotta understand the crossover event in the comics was this absolutely massive, titanic thing. Like, it was every Marvel character taking a side. It was the biggest event. It wasn't necessarily good, but, like, it was a big thing. And then the MCU was like, we got like a half dozen middle-aged actors in an airport parking lot. And Spider-Man. We got Spider-Man, guys. He's in the movie now. And so that was kind of... It didn't feel as massive. It kind of highlighted the emptiness of the Marvel Cinematic Universe at that point, that this was everything we could pull together, that it was just these, like, half a dozen to a dozen co-workers and some kids they found, and that was the extent of this giant crossover event. That was all they could pull together, and it kind of made the world feel a little bit cavernous and empty, but the comic run is definitely partially responsible for how the adaptations started getting all chin-strokey about, do we really need heroes, etc., etc. So, the gist of the comic run is that superheroing has become a very, very common career. There are solo actors and little teams getting into the gig, picking fights for fame and fortune. The inciting incident of the series is that this minor superhero team of teens with a reality TV show picks a fight with some actual heavy hitters. One of them blows himself up, and an elementary school and the team of teenagers, although nobody really brings that up, gets fully exploded in the crossover. So after
Crossfire?
Yeah, sorry, in the crossfire and the crossover. So after the baby exploding incident, this kind of becomes a hot button debate issue, and everyone is forced to take a side. And like immediately, the first thing the comic does is like, well, we can't ban superheroes because we live in a world with thousands of supervillains, and they're not just gonna go away because we make it illegal to be a superhero. So that's categorically not on the table. But the question is basically, would it be better if superheroes were just cops? Cops never do anything wrong. That would be good. Bunch of stuff happens. Supervillains still obviously exist and will continue to exist, so superheroes still have a reason to exist, but the idea that maybe superheroes should be regulated kind of just becomes this back and forth thing. There are several factors in this conflict, one of them being a superhero as government-approved civil servant does not work with superhero has a secret identity, but for a lot of heroes, secret identities are like necessary to protect their loved ones. Superheroes working for the government means the government is telling them what problems they can and can't solve, which means the government needs to be morally right about everything and all that good stuff, which is
Big ask.
Big ask, yeah. The X-Men point out that they already deal with unjust persecution from citizens and are in constant danger of the government going from regulating their actions to regulating their existence, so they're kind of categorically not in this. They just really would rather none of this is happening. Once the Registration Act in the comics becomes a law, S.H.I.E.L.D. cracks down really hard on heroes doing things like stopping muggings. Kind of makes it seem like they're maybe losing the plot a little bit. And as things go on, Team Tony, which is Team Pro Registration, starts releasing supervillains from prison to hunt down the renegade superheroes that are just trying to help people. And that's the point where I was like, oh, cool. Tony has fully lost the plot. Wow, what a tragic... It's crazy how the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Unfortunately, everyone in Civil War is a big dumb idiot because apparently nobody told the artists and the dialogue writers that Tony was actually supposed to be right the whole time, so they're like, wow, he's doing all these really bad stuff. We should probably highlight how it's bad and he's being a supervillain. And then they were like, no, actually, Captain America is bad. You see, Captain America, noted bad person. We had to, in the final boss fight, we made sure he got tackled by a paramedic, a cop, and a firefighter all at once so they could tell him he was being bad and you had to listen to them.
He gets like the reverse Spider-Man 2 train sequence where a bunch of New Yorkers are like, hey, you're a dick.
Yeah, literally. And he's like, oh no, what have I become? I'm gonna immediately turn myself in. Also, like, there's just all these weird little secondary things in the plot, like when Tony goes kind of full, like, everyone who isn't on my side should be in prison and I'm sending supervillains after Spider-Man to nearly beat him to death in a sewer, but I'm the good guy. There's like this mention of like, hey, normal crime is down to like 0%. And I was like, oh no. Oh no. They're just hand-waving that bad things will still happen sometimes. But even in this, even in the now archetypical do we need superheroes plot, the need for heroes is not actually ever in question. It's pretty much taken for granted that in the Marvel comic universe, they are absolutely necessary. You know, there's fucking snake people coming out of sewer tunnels and like blowing up banks. Of course you need somebody with superpowers to deal with that. But this is because the Marvel Comics universe has been running for decades and is absolutely packed full of bad guys and nobody ever stays dead. It's really busy. We believe that there will always be something for heroes to do. We can take that for granted in the comics universe because the comics universe has decades of precedent established. They don't need to do any work to be like, oh no, we put all the superheroes in jail and then a bad guy showed up. What were the odds? It's like, yeah, of course a bad guy's showing up. There's bad guys everywhere. There's bad guys in this arc. But when you're doing an adaptation, things get more complicated because you need to do a lot of work to establish those things. And in the runtime of a 2-hour movie, it can be really hard to do that. It's not impossible, but it can be really hard.
You gotta fast forward through a lot of stuff.
Yeah, so I've identified some problem children, just some general patterns I've observed. In these movie adaptations, you generally get one threat per movie, and they usually end the movie by dying. And for the most part, you don't get any villains that recur. I'll highlight the Nolan Batman movies in the next slide, but this was kind of an unfortunate real-life writing the plot, because in the first movie, kill Ra's al Ghul, fine, whatever. In the second movie, they clearly wanted to bring the Joker back. They kill Two-Face, but they are like, yeah, the Joker's like, we're gonna do this forever. And then unfortunately, Heath Ledger passed away, and they clearly didn't want to recast him. So, functionally speaking, oops, and then the third movie's the last one. So, you never build up a rogues gallery. You never get these villains that get arrested, go to jail, and then come back bigger and badder. You just get one threat per movie, and then the hero just tortuously continues to exist with nothing to do. Also, typically, these threats will arise in direct response to the heroes. They might have already been doing something bad, but they get notably worse when the heroes get a hold of them. The superheroes cause the supervillains to exist. It's not the other way around. The superhero is already doing their thing before the bad guys show up. Now, this is not inherently a bad thing, because again, in the timeline of narrative development, you usually start with normal problems, and then narrative escalation causes you to bring in problems like supervillains or genius crime bosses and stuff like that. You start with the normal problems, and then the supervillains show up. So it's not the worst thing in the world to have the supervillains be inspired by the superhero running around, with the cape and all that. But it doesn't work if the supervillain is the only problem the hero ever actually deals with.
Yeah, when you're dealing with a larger world and you have more time to play with it, having a superhero show up who is a response to the hero in some way, whether it's the hero's actions or their ideas or a villain, what have you, that makes sense as a story idea to play with in a field of other story ideas that are not that exact plot idea. But when that's the only thing there is, it flattens everything out. And you can do interesting character work with that and having foils and all that kind of like fun, writing 101 kind of stuff that we like. But it creates problems when you're in the confines of a 2.5 hour movie. And if this is your origin story, you basically get the hero now exists and the supervillain immediately shows up to fight them about it. Yeah. And that becomes a very flat world.
Yeah, exactly. And as part of it, the heroes are just not typically shown solving low-level problems between supervillains. The world seems very safe. It's either the literal apocalypse, or it's just a lazy Sunday afternoon. We can throw a party, hang out. This is like, the Nolan Batman movies were kind of okay at not doing this in the first movie minimum, and they were pretty good at showing, like, bad stuff is happening, but, not like much of it. It's not a huge problem for Batman to retire twice in 3 movies. The MCU gets this a lot worse. The world of the MCU is very clean and pretty, and there's never really an implication that any bad things happen between supervillains. Like, they did a little bit of this in the earlier movies, and we'll get to that in its own slide. But, like, as time has gone on, the world has only gotten more uneventful between supervillain scares. You don't even get, like, Spider-Man stopping a mugger in an alleyway. It's a whole thing. We'll get to it. But the fact that we started with Iron Man, who is kind of a complicated hero to set the precedent for an entire movie franchise, because his thing is that he is almost always cleaning up problems he indirectly caused. Like, Stark Tech weapons are all over, and they're all problems, and they're all making bad guys worse, and he's just trying to make up for that. And that's an interesting arc for a character to have, but it means you don't really get Iron Man, like, stopping muggings, or, like, convenience store robberies, or other friendly neighborhood stuff. And
yeah, once you have a certain amount of power from a giant robot exoskeleton, stopping street-level crime seems so narratively imbalanced that it would almost be silly to show that.
Right.
But then you're left with a situation where there is nothing for Iron Man to do.
Exactly. And the fact that almost all of the problems are things he caused, while in character, does only contribute to this idea that the threats come around because of the hero, and they are not the reason the hero exists. So these are worlds that just don't give the superheroes enough to do. And then inevitably, over time, the stories begin to start chin-stroking about, oh, do we even need these heroes? And once the supervillain du jour is dead and the movie's ending, the answer goes back to being no. Like, between these massive threats, the heroes don't have anything to do.
We don't need the heroes until the next villain.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Not a moment before.
Yeah, and as is the nature of this problem, which is caused by slowly losing sight of the origins and, reason for a character's existence, this problem develops slowly and gets worse over time. For instance, if we just look at the Nolan Batman trilogy, the first movie is pretty good about this. Bruce Wayne becomes Batman because murder of his parents, yada yada yada. Ra's al Ghul is a villain, but he pre-exists Batman, and when he trains Bruce doesn't become a hero in specific opposition to him. He doesn't know that Ra's is evil, and then he thinks that he's already defeated the League of Assassins when he goes off to start Batmaning. So he's not doing that to fight them, but he was trained by them. And you get independent bad guys like Scarecrow that are just around causing problems. I mean, he's working for Ra's, but Bruce doesn't know that. So in this movie, Batman has a lot of stuff to do. In The Dark Knight, the Joker and Two-Face both arrive in direct, explicit response to Batman. They would not exist without Batman. And when he ends the movie by taking the fall for Two-Face victims, he retires. He's literally like, Gotham doesn't need me right now. And it's like, what do you mean?
It's better to have the idea of Harvey Dent being a good little noodle than an actual Batman to do physical things in the world. I think
it's baffling.
Your point about both of them arising in explicit response to Batman, they do that in two different ways. The Joker explicitly states that he is essentially a philosophical counterpoint. Newton's second law of Newton's second law of the Ubermensch, essentially. For every big guy, there's an equal and opposite big guy. Where he's like, because Batman is so good, I need to be a little bastard. Whereas the Two-Face villain origin is explicitly a choice that Bruce makes that directly creates him by his own hand, even though Joker set it up.
Yeah.
Again, because he's just a little gremlin. He's just a little
pain
in the butt.
Also, Newton's second law is force equals mass times acceleration. I think it's Newton's first law. But anyway.
Dang it.
It's three laws. Who cares about the order? Anyway, so again, in The Dark Knight, it's like, all right, we've got Batman established. Now we can start expanding the rogues gallery. This is like a reasonable direction to take the franchise in. It's like, okay, we got Batman. He's doing stuff. There's problems for him to solve. And now he's attracted some attention. The Joker has arisen as his ideological equal and opposite, and the Joker makes Two-Face for shits and gigs. But also, it's Batman's fault for not stopping him or coordinating with the cops. Batman ends the movie by retiring, which is a weird decision for part 2 of a trilogy. And then in The Dark Knight Rises, Talia al Ghul and Bane are, again, direct responses to Batman. They were doing their own thing, but Talia al Ghul is here for revenge for her father, and she brings Bane and locks the city down for evil reasons. And Batman comes out of retirement to stop him, then immediately fakes his death and retires again. And it's like, okay, cool. We really can't just keep him on ice until the supervillain du jour shows up and he finally has a reason to exist again. And there's another, slightly weird undercurrent in the change between The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises, which is in the first two movies, it is just categorically established that Gotham police are incredibly corrupt. They're the worst. Gordon is the only good cop. And then The Dark Knight Rises is like, what? What do you mean? They're the thin blue line, the standing between Gotham and total anarchy, and they're
I was gonna say,
so
oh no,
good.
all those blue lives are trapped in the cave underneath the city.
It's such a weird, just complete reversal, and it inadvertently reinforces the idea that Batman is not necessary and hasn't been necessary, because it's just like, what do you mean? If we just had all them Gotham cops back, everything would be fine, which is just weird. I watched these movies back to back in one night, and you really notice if you're doing it that way. So basically, after his origin movie, this version of Batman is completely unnecessary, except when he's stopping the threats that he himself has contributed to, and his retirement does absolutely nothing bad to Gotham ever. I don't even know if they pay lip service to since the disappearance of the Dark Knight, crime is up 50%. I don't even think they do that. They might, but if so, that's tell don't show, because it's not at all indicated in The Dark Knight Rises.
I I have not seen that movie in a very long time, but to my recollection, they're mostly still just sad about poor old Harvey.
God, it's been like 8 years.
Yeah.
I feel like I punch down on these movies a lot, or rather punch up because I am but one person and these movies made like $1 bazillion. But like,
Yeah.
it's just, this has been bothering me about them for ages and ages. I think it's the Honest trailer for it that mentions like clocks in maybe a year as Batman. And I was like, hey, yeah, wait a second. We don't get any Batman in these movies. And like the movies, previously I thought the problem was that they felt embarrassed to be superhero movies. Because it's like, we gotta explain the silly ears. They can't just be bat ears because he looks like a bat and bats are scary. They gotta be radio transceivers because that's cooler. And it's just like, guys, come on. He dresses like a bat. His name is Batman. What are you doing? But like, I think this is actually the problem that was bugging me. Like, they are embarrassed to be superhero movies, but also they're embarrassed to let him be a superhero. He doesn't really do superhero things most of the time.
Even in the beginning of The Dark Knight, the one instance that we really see of him fighting crime is those goofballs in the parking lot where it's, I'm not wearing hockey pads.
Oh, yeah.
Where they're not even treated as a real problem.
Well, no,
they're just a joke.
Because there's like fake Batmans in there, right? That's the hockey pads guy. Yeah, because he's inspiring people, and he's like, inspiring hope. Stupid, whatever. Why would I want to do that?
Even then, it's not actually him taking on like even the semblance of a problem. It's still something he caused indirectly by dressing like a bat.
I do think the other Batmans were fighting some kind of criminals. I think that was part of that scene, but like it's so secondary to him being like, all these posers and nerds who don't have $1 billion to fund their power armor and their fun toys and car. Bunch of weenies, am I right? Anyway, so I really want to beat the hating the MCU allegations, and I'm not doing myself any favors by doing this slideshow, but I do want to highlight that the early MCU was pretty good about this. Iron Man, again, Tony's whole thing is kind of trying to redeem himself for previously having been a callous, unthinking, warmongering jerk by making these incredibly powerful weapons just because he thought they were cool, and then not really processing like, oh shit, someone's gonna use these on like real people. Whoops.
I didn't think the rockets would eat my face.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that it does take him getting blown up by a rocket with his literal name on it to figure out that other people are human beings is a little bit dubious. But again, nobody said Tony Stark was a good person. That's like the whole point.
This movie also came out like 5 years after the start of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars.
Yeah, it did, didn't it? Oh boy.
It was fresh.
It was topical. But again, like he became a superhero to stop people from misusing his weapons of war.
No, sorry, 7 years. My bad. I can do math.
It's still fresh. But like, that's the thing. It's like he starts off the movie and he makes this first, the Mark I armor because he's stuck in a cave and he wants to be out of the cave. That makes perfect sense. Great. And then after that, he's like, oh, this is just a fun new idea to tinker with. Also, we're decommissioning the entire weapons thing. I have this weird thing about not wanting to make rockets that blow people up anymore. Don't question it too hard. And then he has that sort of moment of like, I can stop this all I want, but the weapons I made are still out in the world and they're still hurting people. So I am going to stop that. And then he builds the armor, the better armor. He starts using it as like a weapon, and he goes to basically try and make up for the damage he did before he became a slightly better human being. That's a good reason to exist, and the implication that he's been at this for years and years and his weapons have been trafficked all over the world makes it seem like he's gonna have a lot to do for the foreseeable future. This is a very good way to start off a superhero who is presumably going to have a long and very lucrative for the creator's career ahead of him of stopping bad guys. And the fact that Obadiah Stane only becomes Ironmonger because he basically steals Tony's new weapon design is just playing into this theme of Tony's entire arc, which is he keeps making weapons and other people keep using them bad, but only he can use them good. Not saying that's the best way to frame that story. I'm just saying that is the way that the story is framed.
It makes sense as a character arc rather than a philosophical statement.
Exactly. The fact that that's how Tony thinks makes perfect sense. And the fact that at the end of the movie he stops Ironmonger, but he still has a lot to do, that's good. And the fact that
his work is still distinctly undone at the end.
Yeah.
Or unfinished, I should say.
And the fact that he's splitting his focus between, like, hey, let's stop the bad guy weapon people, and also, hey, this arc reactor clean energy thing is great. Let's start doing more like societal infrastructure stuff and like help the world. Like that's good. That's excellent. He's got a lot to do.
We do actually see a lot of that kind of like Stark Tech doing XYZ in like civil infrastructure in later movies. Pretty far down the line, I want to say we see a little bit of that in even like Spider-Man Homecoming as well.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I
the
think
idea
that
of
is
like
true.
Stark actually starts to use his stuff for anything other than weapons is really cool.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good arc for this character to have. Captain America: The First Avenger, World War II is happening. Very good reason to go punch some
gonna be busy.
Nazis. Yeah, he's a busy boy. The movie does end on the note that he gets frozen for 70 years, wakes up in the present, and now there's sort of this this overarching existential question of like, does the world still need Captain America? This is not World War II anymore. We definitely cleaned up all those Nazis. They're not coming back.
Cap, you came back just in time.
We'll get to Cap later. I have a whole slide for him. And then, of course, for Avengers, you get all these wacky goobers with fun powers, and you get them together to fight a space tyrant and his army of faceless goons. That's good. We want superheroes to deal with that kind of thing. That's awesome.
It's also very clear that in Avengers, the team assembles in response to a threat.
It does.
The threat
yes.
is not levied against the concept of the Avengers.
No, the threat's gonna happen anyway. The Avengers
Yeah.
need to do a little bit of work to rally. And it kind of takes
Yeah.
the same rhythm of Iron Man, where like they sort of exist at the beginning, but they exist in isolation for kind of self-centered reasons. It takes a moment of revelation for them to be like, actually, let's do this hero thing. Let's not just do our own thing. You could like draw a parallel between the difference between the Mark I suit and the first proper Iron Man suit, and Tony taking that up for a spin to like stop bad guys rather than just stick around and save himself.
Is Avengers 1 the best Avengers movie?
Probably. I haven't rewatched it in a while. I'm hoping it's still good. So the later MCU got a little bit dicier. Iron
Yeah.
Man 3. I've been in camp. I didn't like Iron Man 3 since Iron Man 3 came out, which was a controversial take.
That was controversial at the time. I remember those conversations in the hallway during lunch.
I just think if I'm watching an Iron Man movie, he should have to put on the Iron Man suit for more than like 4 minutes of screen time. I'm sorry. I think that's also the movie where he starts using the suit as like an independent drone without him in it.
Yeah.
Which really rubbed me the wrong way for reasons I couldn't identify for a while, but it really is just like, Tony does not put on the suit and be Iron Man because it is the most efficient way to do, suit robot drone stuff. He does it because having a suit of power armor is sick as fuck. That's why Iron Man puts on the suit. And this Tony was just like, oh, it's more efficient if I just sit on my couch drinking martinis while the suit goes out and does stuff. And it's like, come on, man. Did you read the title of the movie or not? Again, classic Tony accidentally creates the villain. Then at the end, he blows up all his suits and retires. And then at the end, he's like, but I don't need that stuff to be Iron Man. I'm still Iron Man. And it's like, no, you're not. You're Tony Stark. Put the suit back on. Avengers Age of Ultron. I've been pretty upfront about how I feel about this movie. The fact that Tony creates every single problem in this movie by trying to make superheroes obsolete, that he goes on the record by being like, isn't the point of this so we can go home? It's like, is it, Tony? Is that the point, that you will solve every problem in the world and there will never be problems again? Like, I believe that Tony believes that, but I worry that the writers believe that too.
This pairs interestingly with the idea that a perfect world doesn't need Superman.
It does,
Because
yeah.
Tony's trying to essentially speedrun that process to a perfect world doesn't need Iron Man. But of course, his idea of the perfect world is defined by, there is still an Iron Man, it's just not me. I get to go home. There is still an Iron Man, it's just an AI. It's fucking Chat GPT. It's Iron Man GPT that's in charge of protecting the world.
Oh god, we're
So
more screwed
that's
than
why
I thought.
think because in my head when you were saying it, I'm like, wait a minute, that conflicts. I as I'm spelling it out right now, I don't think it does, because Tony's idea is not that, oh, if the world was perfect, I wouldn't be necessary. The world is, I can make it perfect and then I won't be necessary.
Yeah, exactly. He keeps trying to retire. He spends every movie oscillating between accidentally creating more supervillains and desperately trying to stop being Iron Man. And it's like, I get that that makes sense for the version of the character that they've created, but it's kind of a hard watch after a while. It's like, why are they forcing this character to exist when he clearly has no reason to at this point? Like, every time he does something, it makes things worse. And that's just a bummer. And then when we get to Civil War, we get Vision directly stating that, like, since they became, like, a thing, since superheroes became a thing, there have been, like, way more world-ending threats than usual, and he's like, I don't know, maybe that correlation is causation, and the movie is like, yeah, he's right, and that's just a weird angle to take, because again, it feels like we've kind of lost the plot at this point. It's like, you got these superheroes that existed for, in Tony's case, very personal reasons, in Captain America's case, a reason that stopped being valid, like, 70 years ago, and then they all teamed up to stop one really big apocalyptic world-ending threat, which was great. And then the movies were like, okay, they're like cleaning up the last dregs of Hydra. They've still got stuff to do. They've still got stuff to do. It's great. And then this movie was like, actually, every problem is because of superheroes. They just should stop existing, maybe. And then,
I mean, Zemo's a consequence of Avengers 2, which,
Yeah.
I mean, I thought was cool at the time. It's like, oh, wow, it's really cool that their actions have consequences.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, then the problem is when you zoom out and look at it at a macro scale, it's, oh, they're just consistently making their own problems for themselves.
Yeah.
And I think there's an important difference to, because even as we're having this detailed diatribe, I'm finding myself like just snagging on this little bit of cognitive dissonance of, oh, well, some of these things do make for good character drama.
Yeah.
And I still think that's true. A lot of the things in Civil War especially, but less so, but non-zero, Age of Ultron and Iron Man 3,
Right.
there are interesting character developments that are happening here. The
Yeah.
problem is that those interesting character developments are in direct conflict with this kind of philosophical underpinning of the concept of a superhero. And those two things can both be true. And the general movie-going audience, seeing these as they came out, can look at each individual one and say, that was an interesting character drama.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that was an interesting character drama. Oh, it's cool how this interesting character drama pulled off of this interesting character drama when they crushed that city full of kids in Eastern Europe. But when we look at it as a whole, is specifically when we start to put these things together and see, wait, this feels weird. And it's not that it is a writing failure that breaks the entire point of the movies. I think that would be a stretch.
Right.
But it feels weird.
That's
and
the
it's
thing.
a cognitive dissonance of what the movie is showing you is important and what we as viewers think is important about superheroes, and those two things don't match. And if we don't think about it, it's not going to make us lose any sleep. But as soon as you notice it, you can't unsee it, and it doesn't ruin the movies, but it just makes everything feel weird when you watch it.
Yeah, that's really it. This has been me basically identifying why these movies felt weird to me. I had fun watching all of them the first time. There's great moments in all of them. But in each case, I was like, something about that didn't quite feel right to me, and I'm not sure why. And the fact is, like, Civil War's primary conflict is interesting. The fact that it is at this point the only conflict these characters are dealing with is the problem that I started running into. The idea that every problem we ever see them dealing with is something that they directly caused. We don't really see them except for like little montages of like, oh, they're fighting this Hydra base and it's completely fine, it's super easy, barely an inconvenience, don't even worry about it. Like, why is that getting glossed over? Why are we, every movie at this point, focusing entirely on a problem that they created? And I really do think it's because Iron Man, the first movie, was such a wild success that nobody was expecting, that when they were making later movies, they kind of had to take that first movie and like take it apart and try and figure out what had worked about it so that they could turn it into a formula.
You do see a lot of that in the first phase of the MCU. It's fascinating
Yeah.
to see each movie pull on a different thread of what made Iron Man work so well.
Exactly. But the fact that the villain is basically just the hero but bad was definitely a thing that they all kind of mirrored from the original Iron Man. And I think the fact that the villain is kind of the protagonist's fault was something that they clocked as very interesting in the first Iron Man, that they started using in every later movie. And it ends up creating this world where the superheroes just kind of pop into existence fully formed because they have powers. They have cool things that they can do. So they're gonna do whatever the plot throws at them. And then the plot's like, aha! By popping into existence fully formed, you have accidentally created your antithesis, and now you must fight them for the next 6 to 8 hours of miniseries.
What makes Iron Man 1 work so well, I think, is that Tony and Obadiah were friends and co-workers. They were in on this together from very early on. They knew exactly what they were doing. They were warmongers. They were profiteers off of untold amounts of human suffering. Tony goes through a character change, becomes a superhero, and realizes he was wrong. But Obadiah Stane doesn't. Tony changes, Stain can't. And that's why he becomes a supervillain, not because he just materialized in the story as an oppositional force to Iron Man, but because of a representation of what Tony used to be and what he would have still been if he hadn't decided to be better and become a hero.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is what is so fascinating, is it's not that he is a force that appears to meet the hero. He's not Iron Man's fault. He is an important part of who this character used to be. And in defeating Obadiah Stane, in defeating the Ironmonger, Tony is asserting in not just his martial prowess as big Iron Suit guy, but also philosophically that he has beaten that version of himself from the past, which is why I think that version of the villain is the hero's fault is not really the villain is the hero's fault, but why that kind of idea works in that context, because it's so grounded in this philosophical battle inside of Tony from who he was before and who he is now.
Yeah, I actually wanted to, again, to try and beat the hating the MCU allegations. Iron Man 3 has one of the only scenes of Tony saving civilians, and it's awesome. It's when they're all falling out of the plane, and he uses the unique skill set of the suit and his big thinky brain man thing to, like, save everybody. And that's awesome. That's such an important thing to have. Yeah, that's, like, the best part of the movie.
And if you ever watch that on an airplane, that scene is cut. They don't show that scene if you watch it on an airplane.
Oh my God. Of course, that's terrifying. But so that's the thing. Like, there are moments in these movies where they feel like little glimpses into a more balanced adaptation world, where these heroes feel like they are byproducts of the universe that created them, rather than they are actively distorting the world around them, usually making it worse. But the MCU, after a certain point, really felt like it was kind of dedicated to like even in the 5-year skip, the blip, they kind of had to be like, oh, everyone's sad, and, the lights are off, but, Tony retired and everything's kind of nice. People are bummed out, but just about the only crime we see is when Hawkeye is off doing some vigilante justice that we're going to frame as a bad thing. And very different from all the other stuff that we've been doing for the last hot minute. It's just kind of like, even in the literal end of the world, they have to make it so that the world doesn't go to shit too much, because they're not going to hit the reset button. They're just going to bring everybody who got disappeared back and then be like, see, everything's fine. The world will carry on as usual. Don't even worry about it. Little pockets of problems might pop up at a rate of about 1 per miniseries, but other than that, it's fine. We're good. Peter can just go back to high school, and it's not even that weird. It's like, what? What do you mean?
Yeah, the blip is played for laughs. That's really wild.
And the heroes don't even, seem to be doing anything during the blip. They're like, oh, Captain Marvel, she's off in space taking care of how everyone else in the universe also got blipped. And meanwhile, on Earth, everyone except for Hawkeye is either retired or sulking, and we never see them do anything. And it's like, what?
You do get the sense that Cap and Natasha are working on stuff in that 5-year span.
Right. But
you get that sense. We don't see any of it, so it's a little hard to actually picture what it is that they are doing. The movie does assure us that they are doing things, though. I'll have to give them that.
I mean, but how often
they kind of cheap out on it, but the thought was there. We are told, not shown. I will grant you, we are told, not shown. But they did take the effort to tell us.
That's the thing. The thought was there. They knew it was important that these heroes had stuff to do, but they seem really unwilling to create the kind of world that seems like it actually needs the Avengers on a regular basis. I did want to highlight specifically the evolution of Captain America through these movies, because I think it's very interesting.
Yeah.
As we mentioned in the first Avenger, Steve Rogers has a very, very good reason to become Captain America. World War II is happening. He can't participate because he's sick, but he becomes a super soldier so he can fight in World War II. He's initially stuck as a mascot, but he ends up going rogue and taking matters into his own hands to save Bucky and also everybody else. Does a lot of cool hero stuff in a fun montage. The montage ends when Bucky explodes, but that's fine. But Captain America has a lot to do, and he knows it. But then when he sacrifices himself and gets frozen for 70 years, wakes up in Times Square, the question becomes, do we still need Captain America? The war that created him has been over for decades. So what is the place of Captain America in this new world? Next time we see him is in Avengers, and it's like, well, good news. There's a giant world-ending threat. Captain America has just been parked on the shelf in S.H.I.E.L.D. HQ, so they can just pull him off and have him do stuff, and it'll be great. He gets in some combo moves and couple one-liners. He's very underpowered for the battle and doesn't get to do a whole lot. It also really seems like Whedon just doesn't like him as a character and doesn't enjoy writing him. So he doesn't really get to do much, except be Coulson's celebrity crush. So this doesn't really answer that core question that was posed at the end of Captain America, which is, does the world still need him? Because they sort of try and do a little like, oh, he's the one who sort of pulls the team together. He's the leader. He's got actual combat experience and knows how to coordinate a team of people with different skills. But again, suffers a little from the fact that Whedon clearly doesn't like him very much, so he doesn't get to do a whole lot, and he mostly just get owned by Tony with facts and logic a few times.
As much as I don't like to just kind of pick on Joss Whedon for no reason, there are reasons to pick on him. I think it's very telling that the closest thing we got to a real look at Cap was this little like 3-minute sequence of just what he's up to before he's in the gym where Fury comes to meet him. He's just kind of walking around through New York trying to find his way, but clearly struggling. He goes to the restaurant where Ashley Johnson's character is, and he like tries to say hi, and he doesn't, and then Stan Lee's like, ask for a number, you moron. Of course he doesn't know how cell phones work.
Wait, I'm sorry.
So there's this whole sequence of him trying to exist in the world, and they just cut it from the movie.
I knew it!
Because Whedon doesn't care about Cap at all.
I knew it. I knew it had to be a deleted scene. I was like, this sounds awesome. Oh wait, Ashley Johnson, waitress character, shit.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Like, there was a whole little subplot in the movie where we see the Battle of New York from the perspective of this random civilian and how she's like trying not to die and getting rescued on occasion. And like, it was such a cool idea. And then they cut it.
And when I was starting that sentence, that's what I was going to talk about, and then remembered that, oh, actually, not only was, like, the stuff that Cap was doing in the battle with Ashley Johnson's character not shown, but the entire preamble, which was more important to his characterization of how he's feeling at the start of the movie, is also not shown, and I forgot that even existed until I was halfway through explaining that.
God, that's sad. But yeah, in the actual cut of the movie, he gets introduced ass first, doing some calisthenics in the gym, which is a choice. But like, the thing is, he's just kind of there in this movie. He's there because he has to be. And he gets in a couple moments to get Hulk, smash, you know, whatever. It reflects the repulsor beam off his shield. That was pretty neat. Pew pew. Then in Winter Soldier, Cap is much better written. I think Winter Soldier is the movie where most people went from like, Captain, whatever, fuck, to being like, oh, Captain America is the best superhero ever. He's so cool. Did you see how he beat up that jet? It was awesome.
You see how he kicked that guy off the side of the boat? Whew, Captain.
Yeah. So at the beginning of the movie, Cap is doing missions for S.H.I.E.L.D., which is great. The indication that S.H.I.E.L.D. is like doing stuff in the background is awesome. And the idea that Cap has now been looped into that, so he always has stuff to do, that's good. Cap is basically a super secret agent. That's cool. He's fighting the last traces of armed conflict in a post-Cold War world. He's still a soldier, he just doesn't have a clear war to be fighting, and he's clearly having a bit of existential malaise about it. And then, of course, with the reveal that S.H.I.E.L.D. has been infiltrated by Hydra, Cap kinda has to go rogue again. At this point, that is kind of his signature move, as it were. And honestly, him and Black Widow just vibing all movie is excellent. I love it. Yeah. And again, Black Widow kind of carries with her the indication that she has a lot to do. We don't know about it because she's a super spy, but like, she's just in the background doing stuff. The indication is that when the camera is off of her, she's probably off doing some crazy shit. That's great. Almost none of the other characters have this energy. And when she joins the movie and teams up with Cap, that energy sort of transfers to him a little bit. There's always a lot of stuff to do. It's like he's getting a peek into her world.
God, Winter Soldier's so good.
Winter Soldier's so fucking good. And of course, Cap is motivated predominantly in this movie through trying to save his brainwashed best friend, Bucky. Historians will say that they were close comrades. But like, he has other reasons to be doing shit. And at the end of the movie, he basically is like, all right, S.H.I.E.L.D. has been infiltrated by Hydra. It all goes down. We have to burn the system to the ground. And I like that. That's very in character for him. It does, unfortunately, mean he is once again left with nothing to do. Because he doesn't have S.H.I.E.L.D., they've axed Hydra, they got rid of the TV screen guy who was, you know, the guy. I am afraid I have been stalling, Captain. That guy.
That guy, Computer Man.
Yeah, he's supposed to be a guy in the comics and the shows, but like, he's exploded now, so he's gone. And they didn't do the thing I was hoping they would do, where it turned out that Robert Redford's character was the Red Skull in a rubber mask. But I mean this with all of my heart. Robert Redford kind of looks like his face doesn't quite fit anyway, so I was like, what a good reveal that will be. And then he was just an evil guy. He was just like a Nazi, so okay, cool. Because again, in the end of Captain America, Red Skull gets quote-unquote disintegrated into a sky beam, so I was like, oh, he ain't dead, he's coming back. And then the movies were like, Red Skull who? Never heard of him. We can't get Hugo Weaving back with such a bad role, so we're just gonna not. Okay, bye. Anyway, so the thing is, by the end of Winter Soldier, there's no shield, and any remnants of Hydra are scattered, tiny, doesn't really seem like they're a huge issue. And then we get Civil War.
Barely inconvenience.
Barely. And then we get to Civil War. Age of Ultron is in there somewhere. I think that's post-Winter Soldier? Yeah.
Yeah, between Winter Soldier and Civil War.
Right. And of course, Age of Ultron, it's another Whedon number. Cap, again, has very little to do.
Rip logs sexily.
Yeah, he looks damn fine while he's just standing around getting facts and logicked at by Tony. They do have the implication that there are Hydra bases that the Avengers have been cleaning out. That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But it's also like the beginning of the movie is them fully beating Hydra. Like that's the last one. They got them all cleaned up, which is like, why couldn't we have a movie about that? I don't know. Again, at this point, I was doing a lot of like internal compare and contrast with how Earth's Mightiest Heroes, the cartoon adaptation, was handling this stuff, where Hydra is a constant present threat that just has giant robots that just walk out of the ocean and cause problems sometimes, and the heroes will sometimes just have to deal with Hydra or AIM, a completely different evil thing that I think they may be like referenced in later MCU movies, but didn't really make a big deal out of. MODOK is normally part of AIM, but that's not really true in the movies. So like the implication that there's just always stuff happening. There's just all these characters that can pop up and cause problems. Every bad guy has an army of robots that can just turn up and be an issue, and the movies just can't really do that because they feel like they need a movie to establish.
Oh yeah, AIM are the bad guys in Iron Man 3. They make the extremist soldiers.
Oh yeah. But again, that ends with them all exploding.
Yes.
Like,
they're a one-time threat.
They're a one-time threat. None of these guys ever get to go like, oh, I'll get you next time, Spider-Man. They just like die. They just die. It's superhero stuff. Nobody stays dead. Anyway, so skipping over Ultron, we get to Civil War. This is kind of the turning point for Cap's character. That's clearly what this is framed at. This is like what the culmination. This is what the conflict has been building to. So you get the Accords. They're proposed to establish government oversight for the Avengers after a mission results in some pretty devastating collateral damage. At this point, Cap is like 4 movies into not trusting authority and going rogue. Tony, meanwhile, is tired of accidentally making doomsday weapons and supervillains and wants somebody to stop him. So obviously...
It's a fascinating way to start the concept of, or to start the conflict of the movie because, you know, in the very beginning, Tony is a complete loose cannon who eventually, after several movies, learns I need to be put in check, his own words, whereas Cap starts off as the absolute government boy and then just slowly gets more and more like, actually, screw this, I'm doing it my way.
I mean,
so they have
fair,
this like character convergence and reversal in Civil War, which on itself is interesting, but it feels weird in the context of what's the point of superheroes? Sorry, I just wanted to throw that out there.
No, yeah, it's
too
good.
Deep into it.
I mean, to be fair, Captain America does go rogue in his very first movie because they're like, we need you to sell more war bonds, kiddo. And then he's like, no, my very close friend is in prison. I must go save him. So like...
He's still going rogue on behalf of the United States government.
Well, that's certainly true. So the thing is, in Civil War, the movie, Cap's side is kind of broadly framed as the correct one. Like, they try to make it ambiguous, but like... By the end of the movie, Tony is fully motivated by personal vengeance. The Accords are thrown out the window. He's just really mad. The problem is a matter of this is supposed to be payoff for some planting that they failed to do, which would answer the fundamental question, why exactly is it so important for Cap and the others to stay independent when Cap has absolutely nothing to do? He spends the entire movie rescuing Bucky, because when he's between Avengers movies, rescuing Bucky is the only thing that he has to do. There's no other problems left for him to solve. Hydra's been beaten. AIM exploded in that movie. Cap never even met them. He has nothing to do. He's not doing fun missions with Black Widow anymore because S.H.I.E.L.D. is exploded and Widow's underground. So, like, the entire movie is like, the best hands are our own, you know, we need to be in control of ourselves. And it's like, to do what, man?
Yeah.
So that's the problem. They never answered the question, it's the future, what does Captain America have to do? Because typically, this question is answered with, Captain America is the best of all of them. He is the Superman figure. He is the paragon. He sets the moral standard. He was the first and the best. He is who everybody else has to try to live up to. And they don't do that in the movies. They sort of play with it a couple times. They're like, oh, Tony's dad was a big fan of Cap, you know, when they hung out for like 2 weeks. Like, that's all you get. But you don't really get the fact that when Captain America enters the scene, the story gets better. It makes more sense around him. He's this ideal of heroism, and they don't do that in the movies. And without that, he kind of struggles to justify his existence alongside physical gods and superpowered robot badasses and people like Captain Marvel. Like, you try and put them in the same fight, the same weight class, and he really struggles. But like, again, Earth's Mightiest Heroes Season 1 is very good at making you believe that Captain America is absolutely necessary. And they even pull off in Season 2, he gets replaced by a Skrull, and you've gotten so used to the actual character of Captain America that you can tell that he's not acting right. He's acting like he's being written by somebody who finds Captain America boring. And then when we get him really back, it's like, oh my god, I've missed him so much. He's doing actual heroics.
The Skrull Cap in Earth's Mightiest Heroes acts like the first thing you'd ever expect Captain America to do, but never anything more complex than that. It's the most, like, flattened, simple, core concept of, like, oh yeah, this is a guy who is big and strong and heroic,
and he doesn't know a lot about the present day.
The Skrull just doesn't understand enough of what it is to be a Paragon, because how could it? It's not Cap. So its version of Cap, like, hits some of the notes, but can't actually compellingly sell the idea that Cap represents. And it is really cool that you can see that in just the way that Skrull Cap acts.
Yeah, and the MCU kind of never really figured out how to pull that off. And again, they only had a handful of movies to do that in, and 2 of them were written by a guy that didn't like him very much. So like, what were they supposed to do? So they never answered the question of what exactly Cap was doing there. What was the point of him? He didn't get given anything to do. He didn't get Hydra to fight. He just existed, and because he had powers and was hanging out with the Avengers, he would come along on the missions and do stuff. And like, that was it. And they only really got missions on screen. And the only times we got an indication that stuff was happening off screen is when they were finishing it up, and then they were done, and they were never gonna have to do it again. So in Civil War, Captain America's side, which is again framed as like morally more correct and more like, hey, we have superheroes for a reason, and it's not to be super cops. The fact that Cap is fighting really hard for like, we have to be in control of our own destiny and power because the world needs us, it doesn't need government with superpowered thugs. It's like, to do what, Cap? To do what? To rescue Bucky again? You were already going to do that. So he doesn't really have an ideological leg to stand on, because like, he's fighting super hard for this Paragon thing to just do nothing. And then at the end of the movie, he breaks out the other heroes to sort of form the underground Avengers that they kind of have at the end of the Civil War run in the comics. And he sends Tony a letter and a phone, and he's like, if you need us, if you need me, I'll be there. And then they don't. They don't need him until Infinity War and Endgame. And then after that, he fucks off into the past and retires forever. They just didn't need him. Ever.
I mean, even still, in Infinity War, Tony never calls him. He's going to, but then doesn't. Still kept him on speed dial. But when we first meet Cap, he saves Vision from getting got by some space bad guys. And you get the sense that, like, you know, Cap and Natasha are kind of running around doing some stuff on their little rogue Quinjet that they stole from the Hydra parking lot. But they're not really up to anything. He grew a beard. What was he doing between Civil War?
Looking damn sexy.
Yeah, he was just going to a real good barber. And that's the only indication of what he was doing in between those movies.
And that feels really tragic. Because, like, these movies have taken over a decade. And there have been a lot of them. But again, it cannot compare to the sheer magnitude of how much stuff the source material had to work with. And they never really figured out a way to compensate for that by making it seem like the world was busy and stuff was happening. I did want to highlight a different punching bag from the MCU. MCU Spider-Man really has this problem. It takes 4 entire movies before the writers think of a reason for him to be Spider-Man other than Spider-Man was in Civil War and we got the rights from Sony, so now Spider-Man's in the movie. Woo! So, timeline of operations. When Peter is introduced in Civil War, Tony asks him why he does his amateur superheroics that have been captured on video. He, like, saves some people from a bus. It's pretty cool. And Peter says, look, when you can do the things that I can, but you don't, and then the bad things happen, they happen because of you. And of course, this is a twist. It's like a perspective inversion on the classic power and responsibility speech that has historically been his entire driving motivation. Peter has powers. He has the responsibility to use them to save others. He could use those powers for other stuff. The reason that he doesn't is typically because of the tragic death of Uncle Ben at the hands of a criminal that Peter could have stopped. Now, this movie subtly indicates that Uncle Ben has already died, and that has all already happened. We don't need Spider-Man's origin. We're all familiar. We've all seen the Raimi movies. We've probably all seen Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2. We don't need to see that again.
I really liked this interpretation of it in Civil War. This whole sequence with Spider-Man and Tony is really good.
It is.
It's isolation.
Yeah, because that's the thing. Like, so the movie does a lot of work to subtly indicate that Uncle Ben has already died. Peter has been Spider-Man for 6 months. He and Aunt May seem to have recently moved into a smaller apartment. The place is a little bit messy. It's not fully unpacked. May wears a wedding ring on a necklace in every shot that she's in. There's no sign of an Uncle Ben. There's like other hints too. Did you know that MCU Uncle Ben has a Marvel wiki page? It has no photo references, and he is only ever referenced indirectly because they never mention him by name. When Peter uses a briefcase in one movie, it has Uncle Ben's initials on it, and that's all we get. So the indication is that Uncle Ben, power, responsibility, that's all already happened. So that's why Peter is Spider-Man. And then gets 2 more movies. You get Homecoming, and then you get Far From Home. And in the first part of Homecoming, Peter spends the entire first act just pestering Happy Hogan for missions. Just texting him like, hey man, does Tony think I'm cool? You got anything for me to do? And there's like a whole little comedic montage of how he keeps trying to like thwart some non-existent street-level crime that turns out to be a misunderstanding. He tries to stop a carjacking that isn't happening. Stops a guy from stealing a bike and then can't get the bike back to whoever's bike it is. And Peter's like bored and frustrated and neglected, and he just wants Tony to pay attention to him. And it's like, what? Like, people love this movie. Again, I felt like I was going nuts being the only person who was like, I don't really like this version of Spider-Man very much. Feels kind of weird that he only seems to be doing it to impress Iron Man. I don't know.
I do like this movie despite the foundational, very deep structural problems with it, but that's because I can occupy myself with looking at the surface conflicts and the surface characterization and the very quaint, like, high school friendly neighborhood kind of drama that's going on. Like, that much I actually like, where the Vulture is a threat that exists outside of Spider-Man, and Spider-Man comes into conflict with the Vulture because Spider-Man's sticking his nose into stuff that's not his business because that's who Peter Parker is. That much I like, but especially in Far From Home, where it's like, come on, let me do something, that feels so weird. Where he's craving these Avengers level threats and just desperately he's like chasing the high of Infinity War so badly.
But that's what's so weird, is like they introduce him on such a high note and then it feels like they have to explain why he would like go back to being a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man after such a cool experience. And it's like, what? Why do you think he became Spider-Man in the first place? And like the fact that they have the audacity to give him a New York City that has absolutely no crime for him to stop is like, well, why are you doing this? Why would you do that? Like, so why is this Peter Spider-Man? He gave that speech in the first movie of like, you know, when you can do the things I can and you don't, and then bad stuff happens, and it's like, bad stuff isn't happening, my man. Clearly fighting crime is not a serious issue. They normally pepper in like carjackers and muggings and like other stuff for Spider-Man to just be dealing with, to keep him busy. Except he finds some problems on the movie's plot-mandated Vulture foreshadowing events. And like, I love how they handle Vulture in this movie. The fact that he's another incidental Tony Stark created bad guy is whatever, but again, like that's just kind of, that ties in with Tony's theme. I'm not mad about it, that's fine. And the way they handle Vulture, and the way that this all feels so small scale and high school compared to the stuff that we've been dealing with, that's all really good. And then in Far From Home, there's parts of this movie I liked, but oh boy, they cannot get over Tony Stark in these movies. Like, the threat is a disgruntled ex-Stark employee who is literally creating fake disasters for him to fix. The stakes are completely artificial.
That's probably the most, like, damning comparison we can make of a bad guy artificially manufacturing imaginary disasters.
He's literally making up stakes for the movie. Like, he sucks. I didn't like Mysterio. I was glad that he got hoisted by his own petard in the finale, but man, this movie is kind of it's empty when you look at it. All of the Peter moments are really good. And again, like, Tom Holland is fucking putting his whole ass into this performance. He's doing a good job. It's just, they gave him such a weird version of Spider-Man to play, with very little to do. And then in No Way Home, the movie is like, Uncle who? Doesn't sound familiar. Power and responsibility speech is gonna come from Aunt May. She's getting Uncle Ben in this movie.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so the overt implication is that Uncle Ben, if he did exist at all, did not give this speech. Because this is the moment. This is the iconic power and responsibility moment. It would be weird if this was happening for a second time and we didn't know about it. So all that clever Civil War setup just wasn't anything, apparently. It was just, nope. It really felt like there was like a writer miscommunication or something. Like whoever wrote Civil War was like, yeah, it's great. We don't need to do Peter's origin story again. We can just imply it and then have him be Spider-Man. And then the movies are like, but we never said the thing. We need to have somebody say the thing.
Yeah.
So like, okay. And again, there is so much I love about this movie. But this was another scene where I couldn't figure out why it was rubbing me the wrong way for such a long time. Because like, the performance is incredible. The moment is heartbreaking. But why did Peter need to get his motivation 4 movies into a franchise?
Yeah. And again, Red, to your point, like, this stuff doesn't tank the movie. It just gnaws at the back of your brain and feels really weird and undercuts the weight of some of the dramatic stuff that's happening on screen in a way that's really hard to put your finger on. So it doesn't make these bad movies. There are different things that may or may not make them bad movies in your estimation. Your mileage may vary. I like some of them. I don't like some other ones of them. Like, look, that's just how it is. But it's this stuff that just nags at the back of your brain, that bugs you when you see it, and you can't figure out why the scene isn't really hitting as strongly as it should. And then afterwards, when you think back on the movie a few weeks or a few months later, and you're like, yeah, I don't, like, what was really happening in that? And it's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It doesn't really destroy your enjoyment of it in the moment, but it just makes everything feel a little flatter. And
Yeah.
I want to be clear that at least from my side of this, that's what I want to communicate of what this does to the movies. It doesn't destroy them.
Yeah.
It just, like, sucks a little bit of the wind out of the sails.
I really appreciate you going to bat for the, like, no, she doesn't hate the MCU, I promise, because I don't. I complain about this because the movies are almost excellent for me. The little
It's like
bits...
Obama's anger translator from Key and Peele.
It's just little
What
things
she
like,
means to say is...
yeah, get your hands off those keyboards, boys. But like, I feel like these movies hit almost great for me, like 80% right. And then there's that little 20% where I'm like, I don't know. I just didn't really feel like it was working for me. And then it took me so long to uncover what wasn't working about it. And it's like all these superheroes feel like they exist because they're contractually obligated to. And then they retroactively justify their existence with stuff like this, where Aunt May dies tragically and gives the power and responsibility speech because Peter Parker needs to hear the power and responsibility speech or he can't be Spider-Man. But like, he's already been Spider-Man for 3 movies. And now at the end of this movie, he's like, I am now motivated to try and murder Green Goblin. And then after that, I will figure out how to properly be Spider-Man. And it's like, I am glad for all the shit I talk about, the thing at the end of No Way Home, where they hit the reset button and Peter is broke in a handmade suit and he doesn't have his girlfriend or his support network or his aunt. I'm like, okay, they have reset it to kind of match the Spider-Man characterization that he's supposed to have, where he's the perpetual underdog. And I don't know why it took us 4 movies to get here. It felt like a course correction. But again, I'm excited to see where they go from here. I hope.
If they go from here.
If they go from here. Oof.
They want to, but we'll see if they do. I mean, I like No Way Home once the other Spider-Mans show up. Before that, you have to get through a lot of Doctor Strange and Peter Parker being the dumbest characters in the MCU, both significantly out of character. We've talked about this in previous detailed diatribes before, so we don't need to rehash it here. But this movie vastly improves once we get Spider-Mans to play around with, because a lot of the character stuff they're trying to do just feels really, really weird. Especially Aunt May dying for kind of no reason, when I think it would have been more interesting if they only put if they have to have great power comes great responsibility, like verbatim, put it in the mouth of one of the other Spider-Men. That's a lot more interesting of a dynamic than just, like, offing another one of your adoptive parent figures.
Yeah. Yeah, it was just a weird decision. And again, like, you can tell, like, there's the nugget of some really cool writing in there. That whole scene, everyone says that, like, the fight with Goblin in the apartment complex is the most brutal, most impactful part of that movie. And it is. It's terrifying. The way it's choreographed is great. The acting is awesome. And then it leads into this, and it's a huge moment. And then, like, 40 minutes after the movie's over, when I'm, like, looking in the fridge for a snack, I'm like, ah, damn it. This means that Peter didn't have the power and responsibility thing in the back of his head for the last 3 movies, so what the fuck?
This gets to the larger scale problem with comics, is that once you have a story that just kind of goes and goes and goes for long enough, you're gonna have to make choices about which story is, for lack of a better word, the real one. And you get, do we let Civil War be the version of this establishing arc that we want to tell, or do we say, actually, screw that, this is the movie that's coming out this year, so we're gonna have this one do it?
Yeah.
And in comics, you have stories that run for decades, and you have to make those choices over a long span of time. It's very jarring to see within the continuity of, like, a decade, those things happening in big fast forward.
Yeah, so outside of Spider-Man, MCU Phase 4 has kind of been running into some weird issues with this, which is that they keep introducing these new secret groups of heroes, usually with a secret villain group, or individual secret villain, that is dealt with and then defeated and usually killed at the end of the movie. So, like, they're fleshing out the world. They make it feel busier and, like, more alive, and that should be counteracting the feeling of nothing is happening in the universe and the heroes have no reason to exist, except the way that they're integrating all these secret groups is through retcons, which is like, oh yeah, these guys were here the whole time, and when you ask why didn't they do anything when those movies were happening, stuff that definitely would have affected them, well, they're all, like, sworn to secrecy or something, or have just been hiding. It's not that they've been busy with their secret villain group. They just haven't been doing stuff. And that's a weird angle to take in a lot of these cases, because it feels like both of those writing angles would work. Like, oh, I couldn't interfere with the Thanos thing because at the time I was, like, off in space dealing with this completely unrelated problem. Yeah. Or, like, we were fighting a bunch of sharkmen from the Marianas Trench or whatever the fuck. Or, like, oh, all the witches in the world were, like, stuck in the astral plane for unrelated reasons during the Thanos thing, so we didn't do anything. And it's just like, that could work to make the world feel bigger and busier, that there's stuff happening all the time, and the reason why the characters haven't been interfering is because the world is actually that busy. They did that joke, or it's not, well, I mean, they played it as a joke in Far From Home. It was like, this is like an Avengers level threat, why aren't the Avengers participating? And Fury, like, rattles off all the cool stuff that the Avengers are doing off screen, and it's like, what? Why can't we watch that movie?
To your point, it's a really hard sell to take a movie like The Eternals and try to, with a straight face, say that they looked the threat of Thanos dead in the eye and thought, no, we kind of had, like, an oath that we swore to not get involved.
It's fine. I know that the Celestial or whatever we're incubating in the core of the planet needs a large population and Thanos just cut it in half, but no, that's not enough reason for us to disrupt our lucrative Bollywood careers or whatever the fuck. Like, I don't know. It's weird, and some of this is cool, and the fact that now they exist in the universe is good, because now the world feels a lot busier, there's more stuff happening, there's more crossover potential. If they did Civil War now, that airport parking lot would be way more full. But, like, you know, it's taken a long time.
They'd be struggling to find parking.
Oh boy. And the thing is, like, in contrast, in the comics that these are adapted from, stuff is happening all the time forever. Oh my god. It's really nonstop. So if you have, like, oh, why didn't these characters help out with this other plot? It's like, there are a million reasons that could be happening. They could be in another dimension. They could be dead. They could be brainwashed for a while. They could be just dealing with a completely different threat somewhere else. Like, there's so much happening in the Marvel and DC Comics universes that they can just be like, oh, we can't call in help for this one because everyone else is busy. Or, like, we don't have time, or, you know, the communication's down, it's just us. Like, it's generally expected that every hero is always busy. And there are a lot of ways that this precedent is established. One of them, my favorite example, being Superman's Day Off. Man of Tomorrow, issue 12. Superman spends a day shouldering Atlas's burden, holding up the heavens.
That's so cool.
It's so fucking cool. This chapter is excellent. And basically, the beginning of the chapter is like Lois and Perry White being like, oh, I don't know about this, but, you know, he did ask us. And basically, the headline is Superman's Day Off. And it's like, so now everyone's like, oh, yo, it's open season on Metropolis. Superman's not in town. And every other hero just turns up to pick up the slack. You get Supergirl, you get Black Canary, Firestorm, Flash, and then just like random people around town helping out, you know, saving cats from trees and facing down a gangster, pointing a gun at his face, because it's Superman's city, so, you know, we can't let gangsters run rampant here. It's a very, very cool, very sweet and heartwarming issue, but it also just kind of highlights, like, this is the amount of stuff that Superman is up to on an average day. Like, it might be slightly worse than normal because all the supervillains got wind that Superman wasn't going to be in town, but, like, that's how foundational he is. And the fact that all this is happening in an issue when he is literally holding up the sky is pretty, like, symbolically transparent. Like, we get it.
That is so cool.
Yeah, it's so fucking cool.
I'm looking at the panel in the bottom right where the kid's helping with the cat, and it says, no problem, ma'am, just doing what Superman would.
Mm-hmm.
That's so cool. Even every regular person is just like, oh, I can take some of this weight. I can help. It's not just other superheroes stepping in. It shows that Superman is not only putting out fires and solving problems, but he is actively an inspiration to other people, and him being around, one of the things he does is inspire people.
Exactly.
That's really cool. I like that a lot.
Yeah, this issue is great, but also, like, this isn't explicitly a break from anything that's already been established. It's not like it's news to us that this is the amount of stuff Superman is typically dealing with. There are tons of stories about that. Like, we just kind of understand that this is how busy a comic book superhero is likely to be. Like, the world is big. There's a lot of heroes that can come in and pick up the slack, but it's like a notable shift. And it's like, these are some really heavy hitters. It's Supergirl, it's Flash. Like, these people are like, all right, we gotta work together and make up for Superman not being here to do what this job requires. And that's a level of busyness and structural importance that is easy to get across in the comics, to the point where it's just the expected status quo and hard to communicate in an adaptation. The fact that this is the precedent of the comics can be used for heartwarming moments. I've told you about this. I don't know if I've mentioned it to the folks at home, but there's a bit in the current Nightwing run where Nightwing he's briefly, like, he gets knocked out and tied up and his mask gets taken off, and it turns out it's not a problem. The person he's dealing with is actually an ally, but he doesn't know that at the time. And when he puts his mask back on, he's like, Oracle, I need you to call off whatever rescue you just called in. And she's like, oh, are you sure? Okay. And it's like, oh, turns out all of the Teen Titans and Batman were coming in to save him. And it's like, this is so sweet. Like, this is the first time any of these characters have shown up in, like, chapters and chapters in this run, because they're just off doing their own thing. But, like, nobody's too busy to come and rescue everyone's favorite boy hostage, am I right? And I just think that's really sweet. And, like, this wouldn't make sense in a superhero universe that didn't have things for these characters to do all the time. The fact that they dropped everything to come to his rescue is a sweet and heartwarming moment, but only because we expect them to be way too busy. Like, we don't normally get this kind of crossover, but the fact that this is enough to get them out in force is sweet and cool. And this is not something that a lot of adaptations have been able to pull off. And part of that is because every single one of these characters on screen would need their own origin movie and probably a sequel where they retire, and it's just fine.
And it's really expensive to get those characters to show up for 3 panels worth when you're dealing with a giant movie.
Yeah.
Are you really gonna burn one of Chris Evans' 9 movie appearances on something like this?
Yeah. It's like, oh, well, Cyborg, Raven, and Beast Boy didn't say anything. Do we still need to pay them for these pages? Okay. Now, the thing is, I really want to be fair. Superhero adaptations are dealing with a nearly impossible task. There's 80 plus years of canon. There's a ton of obscure characters that the comics can just pull out whenever they want. It's like, hey, remember this obscure one-off character who later got her own miniseries? Yeah, we're just bringing her in. Who cares? Whatever. There's no canon. There's just retcons. Retcons on retcons, one could say. And the comics have all these crossovers that the movies don't necessarily have the rights to do. There have been, like, Marvel versus DC crossovers before that would just be unthinkable in the current way that things are arranged. The fact that they were like, hey, we really need Spider-Man for Civil War. He's really important in the comics, but Sony has the rights to Spider-Man. Like, the fact that they were doing all this behind-the-scenes negotiation for that The comics don't have that. Like, there's a little bit of rights shenaniganery, but for the most part, crossovers are much easier to arrange. So adapting that stuff can become very, very difficult. And they just don't have this massive backlog of story to draw on whenever they want. They're trying to build something from the ground up. The world of superhero comics is way bigger and way busier than any adaptation could really capture. They've had 8 decades to do this stuff. Nobody ever stays dead. The underlying universe is just full of like mad geniuses and mutants and rogues galleries. And even in the runs where the writers forget that there are non-supervillain problems that these characters probably deal with, there's just an endless stream of problems for everybody to fight, and like a continuously established reason for all of these heroes to exist and continue to exist. And a movie franchise that introduces only one problem per movie and usually kills them in the finale will never ever catch up to this precedent that's been established in the way that the comics are laid out.
Yeah. I think this is also a similar sensation to when people say, oh, I really like the kind of street level MCU stuff. I like the ones that are more grounded, because the frame of reference of, you know, fighting crime in a city is something that we can very clearly conceptualize and fill in the blanks of what these characters would be doing in between. Whereas, like you said earlier, like with Iron Man, like, is he gonna go stop muggings in an Iron Man suit? He could, but that seems like weirdly mismatched and beneath his power set, so it's much harder to fill in those blanks. Whereas with comics, when you have so many threats, there's just a constant rogues gallery busting out of prison every other Wednesday, it's a lot easier to imagine that the world is just busy all the time with this.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is, like, some adaptations do actually manage to pull off this vibe. Blade, the 1998 movie, I didn't know it was 1998. This movie's 25 years old. So Blade is based on a Marvel comic run. Did you guys know that there's a secret underworld of vampires in the Marvel Universe? They have their fingers in every government. They control the police. No? Good. It's because Blade is single-handedly fighting all of them all the time. He's the only person who ever deals with these vampires, it seems like. But he does such a damn good job that they can remain a secret world under, like, urban fantasy threat without everybody constantly being like, oh my god, there are so many fucking vampires in New York City. How did they get here? Yeah. So this movie has the urban fantasy advantage that the heroes and villains are in a secret war, so it never really feels like the protagonist is unnecessary because he is blatantly and single-handedly holding back a globe-spanning undead threat, or at least keeping them so intimidated that they can't come out of the shadows and become a huge problem forever. So that's good. Good job, Blade!
This is a similar reason for why the first Doctor Strange movie works so well, because their whole job is to stop the sky from falling, essentially.
Yeah.
Where it's like, have you seen any magical incursions in the MCU up until this point? Good, the sorcerers and Kamar-Taj are doing their jobs.
Yeah, exactly. This is the thing they could have been doing with Phase 4. You introduce a new cabal of heroes, and you also introduce the globe-spanning threat that they have been actively holding off the whole time, to explain why they haven't been able to participate. Like, it would not be that complicated. I don't know why they haven't been doing that. And they have done that in a couple places. I have some examples later on. This movie really just kind of sums up, like, you can just introduce a hero and the secret, immensely powerful, scary bad guys that they've been dealing with, that they're trapped in an eternal conflict with. They don't end the movie by winning outright. They do end the movie by beating whichever individual supervillain they were dealing with. And then the status quo resets. They go back to fighting vampires and everything's great. It's not that complicated, but they really pull it off. And like, they really show like, yeah, there's the secret vampire nightclub that he, you know, slices up at the beginning, but also it's like, oh, this cop that goes to check in on the POV character, he turns out to be like working for vampires. They've got their eyes everywhere. Like, it's a lot of paranoia fuel in this movie, but it kind of gets across like, this is a constant omnipresent threat. And this is like one guy and his crotchety mentor that definitely survives the movie, like single-handedly holding it off. It really makes the whole thing feel very necessary. There's never a question of whether or not Blade should continue to exist, because if he doesn't, everyone else better get real good at fighting vampires real quickly. Other example that a lot of people have probably been shouting at the screen for about 10 minutes. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2. There's a bit in this movie where he briefly loses his powers because he's sad about Mary Jane, turns out. So he can't be Spider-Man anymore. His powers aren't working. His eyesight goes back to sucking. He can't stick to walls. He clearly still kind of has his powers because, like, he survives falling off a building and he just kind of walks it off. So,
Is that the first instance of my back?
Yeah, that's the my back.
Okay, good.
So, practically speaking, his powers aren't working. He can't be Spider-Man anymore, so he does the Spider-Man No More arc in the comics. You know, they very painstakingly recreate the shot from the comics. It's iconic and all that stuff. And the thing about that is that being Spider-Man has been absolute hell on his mental health and his work-life balance. It's been really bad. He's bad at his homework. All of his teachers think he's lazy and disorganized. MJ's really mad at him. And now that he's not Spider-Man anymore and he can actually, like, do stuff, everything in his life gets better. He's a dork, but he's having a good time, and everyone in his life is like, wow, Peter, you're really pulling your shit together. This is great. Except, obviously not having Spider-Man is kind of bad, actually. They do the little, like, crime up 75%, everything is bad now thing, but the necessity of Spider-Man is illustrated in this one scene where he's walking home, and he sees this burning building, and he, like, reflexively goes for his suit, and then he remembers he has no powers, and his suit isn't on, and he kind of steps back, and then he's like, oh shit, did they just say that there's a kid in the building? And just sprints inside into the fire. He nearly dies, but he does make it out with the kid, and then when he's, like, recovering in the ambulance on oxygen because he inhaled a lot of smoke, he hears that someone was trapped on the 4th floor and never made it out. And obviously, he had no hope of saving that person. He could barely save the toddler, but, like, if he still has Spider-Man powers, he could have saved both of them, no problem, quipping the whole time.
And we've even seen him do as much in the first Spider-Man movie where he's saving a burning building with relative ease until Green Goblin shows up.
Exactly, yeah. Like, we know this is very much within his normal skill set. And this is an interesting case because, like, he didn't go like, oh, the world doesn't need Spider-Man and retires. He doesn't have his powers right now. He couldn't be Spider-Man if he wanted to. But, like, that clearly is, like, affecting him because his life has been getting better. Things are working out, but the moral of this movie is, like, in order to be Spider-Man, to do what's necessary, he has to give up so many things that are important to him. And that's sad, but Peter Parker is much too responsible to sacrifice the world around him for his own personal happiness. It's not easy being Spider-Man. It doesn't make it easy to be Peter Parker, but it is very necessary. And that's really the crux of this movie. And then MJ gets kidnapped and he gets his powers back and everything's fine. So, you know, it's a good movie. I also wanted to highlight Netflix's Daredevil, which does a very interesting angle on this. Again, this is like street-level MCU stuff. And this is also... So I haven't watched She-Hulk, but I've been a little bit concerned about what the MCU is going to do with my angsty boy, because... Yeah,
that's well placed.
Yeah, like, because they brought Kingpin into Hawkeye, and he's still played by the same guy who's still doing the same really good job, but he is so watered down from how terrifying he is in the Netflix Daredevil version.
Yep.
So the way that Netflix Daredevil works is that Matt Murdock's enhanced senses mean that he is constantly, intimately aware of all of the private, closed-door horrors that are going on around him for like miles and miles. So he's surrounded by this evil that nobody else can perceive, but he very much knows it's there. And when he can't use his lawyer skills and a court of law to reveal this and bring the perpetrators to justice, he dresses up like a devil and punches it a whole bunch. It's very emotionally healthy and good for him. But the thing is, like, haha, funny, but like, no, it's not. This is bad for him. He wants to stop, and his friends want him to stop. And he tries to on several occasions. He keeps trying to retire, and he can't, because unfortunately, the world really does need Daredevil. Like, the legal system is not perfectly infallible. It can be corrupted.
It's not that he wants to retire. He wants to be able to just be Matt Murdock, the lawyer. He wants to not need to be also Daredevil. He doesn't want to pull like a Batman Dark Knight. Batman killed those people. Harvey Dent's fine. I'm just going to go hang out in my billionaire mansion. Matt Murdock still wants to help and still knows there's a lot of work for him to do, but he wants to be able to not be Daredevil, because not only is it hell on his physical well-being, but it's also just abominable for his conscience. There are several scenes where he's going to confessional like, I am like beating people up so badly and inflicting so much pain to try and stop them from inflicting worse pain on innocent people, but oh my god, this sucks. And the priest is like, that's
bro.
Oh boy, that's a lot.
Daredevil has he's got this like uniquely angsty power set where his super senses make him very, very aware of all the horrible things happening around him, but they don't make it easy for him to stop them from happening. And like, because he's like hearing shit from like blocks and blocks away, like I said, like he's surrounded by this evil that nobody else can perceive. And he doesn't have the benefit or the comfort of ignorance. He knows that it's happening and he can't stand to let it happen. Of course he wants to be a lawyer. Of course he wants to help these people get justice. But the legal system is easily corrupted and controlled by people like the Kingpin. And when that happens, and the legal system falls through, he has no recourse but to be Daredevil more. And like over the course of the 3 seasons of the show, of which the first one's fine, the second one's bad, the third one's very good, basically all of his friends kind of slowly realize the same thing he's already realized, which is like, oh shit, we do need Daredevil. I'm so sorry. Because there's an episode in the first season called Nelson versus Murdoch, and it is heartbreaking because in that episode, Foggy, who is Matt's like legal partner, figures out that he's Daredevil, and it's basically this like just like 40-minute argument between the two of them where Foggy is like, dude, you've been lying to me our entire lives. Are you even really blind? And Matt's like, oh boy, I already felt like shit and now I feel like worse shit. But after that point, Foggy's kind of like, oh shit, no, actually, Kingpin is really, really hard to deal with. I think maybe somebody does need to go punch him about it. So this whole series is about how like everybody wishes they didn't need Daredevil, including Daredevil. But unfortunately, New York has some problems, and it's pretty easy for extremely rich people to subvert the legal system. And sometimes you just need an extremely sad Catholic boy to go punch a problem about it. And the main struggle of the show is basically Matt finding a way to be Daredevil without destroying himself in the process. Kind of a similar note. The Batman!
Yes.
The Batman really, really does a good job of convincing the audience that Gotham is an absolute shithole. It really, really needs help. And like, Bruce has been Batmaning for 2 years, and it is not helping.
No.
He's trying so hard, but he hasn't figured out what exactly it needs until the very end of the movie. Basically, the entire arc of the movie is Bruce realizing that a symbol of fear and vengeance that just pummels the symptoms of the problem into submission is not going to save Gotham. But that doesn't mean that Gotham is a lost cause like the Riddler thinks. It means that Gotham needs a symbol of hope. Gotham has to believe that it's possible for it to be saved. It can't be dragged into being a better city. It needs to help him a little bit, which is why it's so important that when he does that like flare scene when he's guiding the people out, he doesn't grab anybody and pull them out. They walk out to him. Like symbolically, it's very, very important that he sets the example and the rest of the city follows him, which is very cool. This is a movie that really, really makes it feel like Batman is very, very necessary.
And it's kind of like the inverse problem of Daredevil, where Batman knows that he needs to be Batman. And it's like, why isn't this enough? It's like if Daredevil realized, oh, I also need to be Matt Murdock. And that's a very cool comparison to put them next to each other, because they get toward the same idea that both of these two things are required to transform a city in a system that is just so unbelievably screwed.
Yeah.
And it's really cool to see that character arc play out inside of Bruce's head over the course of the film, and to see at every point how deeply necessary it is. And one of the things that I really like from the very beginning of the movie is that the movie shows, with 3 different examples of crimes happening, Batman cannot be everywhere at once. There's so much stuff going on. Even if he wanted to, he could not put out all the fires that are happening. So he's gotten clever enough to use fear as a weapon to try and make people run away under the fear that they will be the fire Batman puts out tonight.
Right. He's turned it into a roulette wheel, basically. He's like, you don't know which crime I'll stop, but I'm going to stop one of them with punching. But yeah, I've said a few times that this is a Bruce Wayne origin movie, that he's already Batman, but he hasn't figured out how to be the billionaire playboy philanthropist. He hasn't figured out how necessary Bruce Wayne is. And like the one time we see him out as Bruce Wayne, he looks so uncomfortable and like almost terrified.
Yeah.
If he's not being Batman, he doesn't know how to function. But again, by the end of the movie, he's like, oh yeah, okay, this new mayor actually has the right idea. Like in that scene when he's out being Bruce Wayne and the mayoral candidate like gets his arm and is like, no, Bruce, I've been thinking about all these very like good ways that you could be using your money in support of the city, and like he kind of does not answer at all, but like we the audience are like, yeah, Bruce Wayne should be doing that. historically
Yeah.
he typically does. So you're telling me he's not doing that yet? And it's a little bit weird until you're like, oh. This movie is him figuring out that he does need to do that and punch stuff.
Yeah. The Wayne estate is more than a slush fund for his hot rods.
So there's a whole bunch of other examples of movies and shows that have done a very good job of making it feel like the superhero or superheroes involved are very necessary. I asked Twitter about Twitter's still alive at time of recording.
For context, when this video goes out in a month, Twitter is a website that people used to use to talk to each other on the internet.
Oh boy, but yes, before I hit my rate limit for the day, I managed to get some names that popped up a whole bunch. That's why Hero Academia is on there, even though it's cheating a little bit because it's not exactly an adaptation of an existing comic series, but it's kind of doing the same thing. It's unpacking a lot of the same stuff. But yeah, most of these do a very good job of making it clear that like, hey, yeah, this character, they are necessary. We need them, or at least the world needs somebody filling their shoes. So like again, Into the Spider-Verse came up a whole bunch because they really do a lot of highlighting like, hey, without Peter in this universe, like, things are bad. There's like a hole in the city that needs to be filled. And that's why the scene that starts with the leap of faith, where he's swinging through the city and you can kind of see everyone being like, oh my God, we have a Spider-Man again. Like, it's this very healing moment.
Yeah.
Mask of the Phantasm, Batman tries desperately to retire, concludes he cannot. It's kind of a theme. It's Justice League Unlimited brings it all up. Spectacular Spider-Man. Peter always has a lot to do. Moon Knight, an MCU example that I thought did a very good job of being like, yeah, he's got a fucking lot to do. He's got a lot to do. And it's another case of like, this is a secret vigilante that has a divinely mandated task that is gonna keep him busy forever because Khonshu is the protector of the travelers at night. And those guys are always getting into trouble.
There are a lot of them, yeah.
There's a lot of them, and bad shit happens at night all the time. And that's good. That's really cool. And it gives the Moon Knight system a lot of stuff to do. And it kind of explains why he hasn't turned up before, because he's been busy.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of these examples where the story, it might be like, hey, do we really need this character? But like, they'll go out of their way to show that yes, these guys are necessary, they're busy, the world is complicated and full of a lot of different stuff, and they have a lot to do, and that's good. It's cool that this is possible, because when I look at the corpus of comic literature and the thing I'm tacitly asking these adaptations to pull off, it gets really overwhelming. It's kind of amazing that any of these pull it off. Like, I don't want to be too harsh about this stuff. It's just like, there's this underlying busyness that's present in the source material that it is so hard for the adaptations to pull off. But I see adaptations that do pull that off, or at least through careful, precise writing, imply that there is a larger world out there where stuff is always happening, and that if these characters disappeared, the world would notice.
Yeah.
It makes me feel like this is maybe a little bit less of a tall order than I think it is.
I think something to note on this last slide is that there's a preponderance of episodic shows where this is happening, and it makes sense why this would be a lot easier to get this idea across, where the superheroes are dealing with a lot of things. And at any given moment, they're fighting one of them, but there are a lot of things happening, you know, off to the sides or in the background or right before or immediately after, you know, whatever villain of the week they're punching at. And it's hard to do that in a film. Not impossible, as we've seen, but it's a lot easier when you have a limited scope of, you know, a few seasons, you know, dozen or so episodes in each season, where you can just tackle different threats and show that there are all these different things going on, but not so long that you risk running into the Sherlock problem, getting back to the very beginning, where you eventually play around with these ideas so much that you get bored by the regular problems that these guys solve, the crimes, the fires, the kind of everyday stuff that isn't as exciting as a supervillain. And these shows are really good because you get that room to breathe and see what's going on in this world without getting to the point where you've just speedrun all the way to there's only actually one threat that matters and everything else is either like less important than or a subset of this big central threat.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the MCU isn't able to square that, you know, on the whole. They can't square that circle because the individual films are self-contained little bites that have to tell a singular story for usually a singular character.
Yeah.
And when so many of them are origin stories, you get the idea that the heroes have one defining moment in their life where they became a superhero and fought their first bad guy, and then they're just kind of waiting for the next shoe to drop where they have to be useful again. And in between that, there is oftentimes just not that same thing there. So 17 different movies in a multiverse kind of thing are not as cohesive as 17 episodes of a season of Justice League Unlimited, for instance.
Yeah.
Because the structure is just intrinsically different, and it doesn't lend itself to being able to see what are the superheroes doing, because every single movie has to be this big, huge threat, and when every threat is big and huge, none of them are.
Yeah, exactly. We talked about a lot of this when we did your Superman Detailed Diatribe about Superman as the ultimate firefighter. There's a bunch of Justice League Unlimited episodes that kind of tie into that, where it's like, I'll fight Doomsday, the rest of you handle the erupting volcano and the evacuation. Like, there's always something happening. In terms of, like, character has the defining origin moment and then sort of struggles to find their place, I have Wonder Woman on this list of, like, other movies that really pull it off. It's one of those cases where, like, she kind of single-handedly ends World War I. And the shot of her crossing no man's land is widely considered to be like the most iconic, most important part of the movie, because it really shows like, this is what she can do. This is what this character is capable of doing. And it's incredible. And then for various reasons, she didn't really have a lot to do in the other movies about her. I haven't seen Wonder Woman 1984 for the record. The DCEU is pretty good at making the world feel generally kind of shitty. Like there's always a reason for superheroes to be doing stuff, but sometimes the superheroes feel bad and then they don't do stuff.
Yeah, weirdly, with the exception of Superman, the DCEU actually did a pretty good job of giving the heroes reasons to exist. That was one of the things they actually kind of did pretty well.
Yeah, well, it's because they made the world so miserable.
Massive exception of Superman.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like, they made the world just so sad and miserable. Like, they could definitely use heroes. It's just kind of like the movies seem like they don't want to actually let the heroes do anything to make those worlds better. Like, again, with the exception of Wonder Woman, where she single-handedly stops World War I. It's kind of like you've got these two sides of the adaptations kind of not quite hitting it right, because in the DCEU it's like the world is a dark, sad place that desperately needs heroes, but our heroes suck and they're mean and jerks and really angsty, and they say stuff like Superman was never real, and then they die or retire. And then meanwhile Marvel is like, crime? Never heard of it. Everything has been fixed forever. You know, when everyone disappeared and the world went into chaos, everyone just had depression and went to therapy about it. Featuring Marvel's first gay character. So like, it's like two very different sides of the same coin, where it's like the world still doesn't really feel like it needs the heroes, but in one case it's because the world has no problems, and in the other case it's because the heroes don't do anything. But again, this is broad stroke. I'm painting with a very big brush on these, because there are these standout moments that really pull them off. There are things about these that make it work, but that kind of makes the weird imbalance kind of stand out more when it shows up. So yeah, in conclusion, superheroes need more stuff to do. They need more enrichment in their enclosure. Oh boy. I told you this was going to be a shorter one, didn't I?
No, you did not.
Oh, thank God. I mean, I was like, oh, it's only 37 slides? Pah, child's play. No, obviously we had a lot to say about this one.
No, you're talking about a fundamental problem in all superhero media adaptations. That's pretty expansive.
Some of them are good.
Oh, no, definitely.
How much do I have to go to bat for Blade 1998 before people are like, no, maybe Red doesn't hate Marvel on principle?
I think, I mean, I've tried to kind of like pepper this in throughout the course of the Detailed Diatribe, so that we'll get the odd commenters who speed through and then hastily scribble a take. But that was uncharitable of me to say.
They know who they are.
I do want to make it clear that when we come to these kind of ideas of, hey, there's something about this that isn't working for us. Sometimes it's like, and because of this, we just don't like what's going on in this at all. And there are many times that's happened in the past. There are many times it's happened in the future, or that will happen in the future. But this is a case where, in some instances, it really like takes the movie off its foundations and just makes the whole thing feel weird. I think the Nolan Batman movies are a good example of that.
Yeah.
The movies just feel completely empty if you look at it on that level. If you just acknowledge the weirdness of Batman retiring for 8 years and Gotham being fine, it is so hard to invest yourself in what's going on in the movie, and it, I think, tangibly detracts from your ability to enjoy it. That's, I think, a non-zero portion of why people will point out that they really didn't like Dark Knight Rises, even though the problem's also there in The Dark Knight. People just really liked Heath Ledger's performance, and that's entirely valid.
Yeah.
There are other examples, like with Spider-Man where it's like, this is really weird and I can't put my finger on why, but something's wonky here. Where that, like, whether or not it ruins it is depends on your preferences and your tastes.
Right.
And then there are the ones where it's like, this is just kinda interesting, and it informs what's going on. Hi, Cleo baby. I think she's like, you've been recording for 2 hours. Chill out.
I heard that one. That was
yeah,
amazing.
That was a loud squeak. Hi, baby.
Hey,
but
Cleo,
then
do you have thoughts on superhero adaptations? Yes, you do.
They don't bring me treats. They may as well leave me stuck in the tree forever.
She agrees with me completely.
Like the Iron Man stuff, where it's, I think, also kind of on the level of the Spider-Man. Like, whether or not it breaks your immersion will be, you know, your mileage may vary. But the Captain America stuff, again, in that level of, once you realize it, it's hard to unnotice it. Then you get the kind of things like Spider-Man, Raimi movies, and Daredevil, where once you acknowledge this trait of the world, your enjoyment of the thing deepens, and you're able to really appreciate what they did right. And I think it is important to acknowledge that this is not a problem of universal weight across the different adaptations.
Yeah.
Different movies kind of do this and get away with it, or do this and don't get away with it, and it's a function of the story and what they're trying to do that will affect how much the lack of stuff for the superheroes to get up to in their non-Avengers level threat time will damage the immersion of an audience.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't want to make it seem like this is this is the only thing I ever think about these superhero stories. Like I said, there's a lot of points in these movies that I really like. This is basically the culmination of me finally figuring out what's been bugging me about this for the last, like, 10 years? Because I keep noticing these little things about what bothers me about these and which adaptations I like and which ones I don't. And when we were talking about, like, Superman's The Ultimate Firefighter, I was like, that must be it. It's been bothering me that these characters never actually save anybody. But, like, that doesn't really hammer in on the point. It's more like nobody ever needs to be saved in these movies unless it's, you know, flavor text on the supervillain of the week, or it's somebody's, like, love interest or something like that. If a character isn't plot relevant, they don't get to show up, and that means that they don't get to add texture to the world. And you end up with this setting that feels very empty. And the thing is, that is a problem that is not restricted to superhero media. I wanted to focus on superhero media because this is where I think this problem is most visible. But there are a ton of stories where it kind of feels like the only real people are the main characters, and everyone else is just this interchangeable blank slate. And in contrast, you get stories where it really feels like every character is like the hero of their own story. The world feels busy. It feels like there's more going on in it than just what you see when the camera's on.
Yeah.
And that is a tricky thing to pull off, but a lot of stories do it. And there's like this secret sauce in there to making it feel like there are real human beings present and real things are happening, even when you don't see it. And I think that's a very interesting, like, writing hurdle to get over, but I don't really see anybody talking about it in isolation because, of course, like, the main point when you're telling a story is to tell the story. Like, why would you focus on telling the parts of the story that you're not showing? Why would you focus on the parts of the world that never get seen? But, like, it does so much to make a world feel more alive. I think the last movie...
Stop rubbing your face against my microphone.
No.
Sorry.
More ADR. But, like, I think the last movie I complained about in that specific dimension was not a superhero movie. I think it was when I was thinking about Avatar again, Blue Cat People one. That created a world that felt like it was a very, very beautifully rendered backdrop for, like, 3 real people. And one of them dies in the movie, so, like, whatever. I haven't seen Way of Water, and a large part of that was because I never had a reason to want to. And from what I've heard, it does more of the same. It's a very, very beautiful backdrop on a story about the only real human beings in the world, and
a whale.
And a whale. I've also heard very good things about the whale. You don't need to comment about the whale. I already know about the whale. That's kind of another facet of this, where you create these absolutely gorgeous settings, and then they just feel like the backdrop of a school play. It's all two-dimensional, and it stops where the camera stops. And a lot of stories don't do that, and I like those a lot better.
Yeah.
Oh my god, I need to make another cup of tea. I think that about covers what I wanted to say. Bye!
Bye!